prime ministers, chief justices, diplomats, and now the Vice President of the United States. The Indian diaspora have ascended to the highest rungs of government, now holding top leadership positions in 15 countries around the globe. Indiaspora's 2021 Government Leaders List, more than 200 of today's top leaders in government.
Good morning or good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the launch of the 2021 Indiaspora Global Government Leaders List. My name is Sanjeev Joshipura, and I'm the Executive Director of Indiaspora, speaking with you from outside of Washington, D.C. in America. For those of you that are not familiar with Indiaspora, let me tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. We are a nonprofit organization founded in 2012 by the successful investor and entrepreneur MR Rangaswami, from whom you'll hear in a few minutes. And we are essentially a collection of very prominent Indian diaspora worldwide in different geographies, from different professions and different backgrounds, who thematically come together to position the Indian diaspora as a global force for good. The areas that we focus on are philanthropy and social impact, forging stronger ties between the global Indian diaspora in various countries, and most germane to today's event, socio-political and civic engagement of the Indian diaspora. As part of our mission to further socio-political and civic engagement and to position the Indian diaspora, like I was saying, as a global force for good, Indiaspora decided to launch a series of lists last year, profiling prominent Indians worldwide in different professions. We started out by launching in July 2020, the Indiaspora Business Leaders List. This was a list of over 60 CEOs and chairpersons of various Fortune 500 and Forbes 2000 companies around the world of Indian descent. And we held a launch event, much like the one we are doing today, where we invited 6 or 7 of these leaders, and they focused on how they are using their positions of influence and privilege to address issues of the social good in areas like addressing economic inequality, COVID relief, and environmental sustainability, just to name a few. Today's list, of course, focuses on global government leaders of Indian origin. And we will be carrying forward this effort in later parts of this year and beyond, launching lists of the Indian diaspora in different professions, such as philanthropy, academics, so on and so forth. Now, today, we will be starting out with a launch video, after which you will hear the remarks of our founder, MR Rangaswami. And then there will be a panel, a very eminent panel of government leaders and policy experts from around the world, followed by a moderated Q&A session. Our event is an hour long and ends at 12 noon US Eastern Time. So with that, I'd like to now formally and officially unveil the Indiaspora Global Government Leaders List 2021.
We're building a country for every Guyanese.
Presidents, prime ministers, chief justices, diplomats.
These were the words of my president.
And now,
we did it, Joe.
The Vice President of the United States.
I, Kamala.
The Indian diaspora have ascended to the highest rungs of government, now holding top leadership positions in 15 countries around the globe. Their nation's constituents number more than 550 million in total. They come from different careers.
Rishi Sunak spent his 20s in the city with the likes of Goldman Sachs.
From councils to boardrooms. From universities to nonprofits.
And I understand.
From hospitals to courtrooms.
What is the serendipitous sequence of events that would have had to have come together to take someone like me from Chandigarh, India?
The first Indian diaspora who arrived worked to establish themselves. And now their legacy continues with new generations who advance social change.
I want to thank my family and my parents who taught me early on the values that have led me to civil rights work and public service.
Whether civil servants, appointees,
and I stamp every cigarette box in America,
or elected officials, these leaders set new benchmarks.
We've got the godmother of Congress, Pramila Jayapal, got the godfather of the Indian American community, Bera.
They tackle tough issues, both domestically and globally, improving lives for posterity. A source of pride for Indians everywhere, they forge ties across borders and create cross-cultural impact.
Happy Onam. Onam is one of the most important festivals for our community.
These changemakers have reached new heights and are blazing a trail for more leaders to come. Indiaspora's 2021 Government Leaders List. More than 200 of today's top leaders in government.
There are over 200 leaders on this list, and each of their stories is an inspiration in its own right. But I'd now like to turn it over to Indiaspora founder MR Rangaswami, who I know wants to share a few thoughts and details about the list with you. MR?
Thank you, Sanjeev, and welcome everyone to our unveiling of this list. And now I'm going to go into more details of the demographics and who's on the list and other sources of information for us. So we will see that in the upcoming slide deck. And as we bring up the slides, I also want to talk about the diaspora itself. As we all know, there are about 32 million people in the Indian diaspora, the people who live outside of India who are of Indian origin. And it's important to reflect on the history of this migration of the diaspora. Initially, many of the diaspora went as indentured labor to colonies across the world, the British colonies and many other colonial parts of the world. And that was the initial thing. Many of them went involuntarily and some went on their own accord. Now, that was one of the early parts of our migration. Later on, the migration turned to more of opportunity. Can people who were residing in India find opportunities, jobs outside of India? And then the migration turned to one of education, where a lot of Indians went outside to the UK, the US, Canada, Australia, and many other parts of the world to get educated. And then finally, in the more recent times, the migration has happened because of both professionals, like in the IT sector, going to many different parts of the world, and also labor going to many parts of the Middle East. And so together, the 32 million people of Indian origin live outside of India at this time. And the reason we decided to do this list at this point was the milestone moment in the US when a woman was sworn in as Vice President of the United States. And she happened to be the daughter of an immigrant from India. So we thought this would be a great time to shine a spotlight on the dedication to public service that the diaspora have given across the globe. And that's the reason why we're having this today on President's Day in the United States, as the US is probably one of the newest parts of the diaspora, with about 4 million people now living in the US, consisting of about an eighth of the population of the diaspora. So let's look in more detail about the list itself. We have breadth and depth of leadership. You can see people who are heads and deputy heads of government. We have cabinet ministers and diplomats, chief justices, federal legislatures, and other leaders, as well in the US, federal, state, and local leaders. So it's a very comprehensive list that we have published, and it shows the breadth and depth of the level of engagement our diaspora is according throughout the world. And moving on to the next slide here, we can see the geographic dispersion. We are in every continent in the world except for Antarctica. The Indian diaspora has become very successful and is really manifesting itself in 6 continents throughout the world. And when you see the next slide, you'll see much more of the detail of the diaspora itself. And you'll see that besides being in cabinets and diplomats and other parts of civil society, the officials here represent 587 million constituents in their respective countries. And the countries they reside in account for an estimated 28 trillion in gross domestic product. And so where do you find these lists? I think you'll see, you can go to the indiaspora.org website, or you can go simply to lists.indiaspora.org lists.org. And now we're going to show you actually the live list from our website. And it's lists.indiaspora.org. And if you go down and scroll down the list, you'll see pictures, you'll see biographies, you can select on this list by type of profession, by geography, by country. And so we hope all of you will get an opportunity over the next few days and hours to both look at the list, feel the pride of our community, but also tell all other diaspora in the world about this list so that we can all collectively take joy in sharing the accomplishments of our diaspora. So at this time, I want to move to our eminent panel. We have Dr. Aparna Pandey, who will be moderating the session. She's with the Hudson Institute in the United States. And Dr. Pandey has got a brand new book that I would recommend all of you get, which is Make India Great. And joining Dr. Pandey is Dr. Bera. He's actually a medical doctor who gave up his medical practice to join the US government as the longest serving congressman in the United States Congress. We have Dr. Bera, who's also recently been given the chairmanship of a committee on foreign affairs. We also have Ambassador Dr. Niermala Badrising, who used to be the foreign minister of Suriname, of the country of Suriname, and now she serves as the ambassador of Suriname to the United States. Welcome, Dr. Ambassador Badrising. And we also have from the United Kingdom, Lord Dolar Popat. Lord Popat came from Africa. He migrated again once his family had migrated to Africa. He then migrated to the United Kingdom, was a very successful businessman, and now he's a Lord of Conservative Heritage in the United Kingdom. So welcome to all of you, and I'm going to turn over the event to Dr. Pandey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rangaswami, and also thank you to Indiaspora for inviting me to moderate this panel of eminent members of the Indian diaspora. So I'll jump right in because I'm sure people around the world are interested in knowing and hearing from the diaspora, not from me. My first question actually is addressed to Chairman Bera. Chairman Bera, what is it that led you to enter the field of politics? As we've heard, you are a medical doctor and a former public health official. Could you inform the audience that what drove you to enter the political arena?
Sure. I'm grateful for everything that, I've been able to do in the United States of America, and for the fact that, my parents immigrated fairly early from Gujarat, and my father in 1958, my mother in 1959. And, growing up in a traditional Indian household with the values of family, of hard work, of education, I had all this opportunity and have always been politically engaged, as I think many Indian families are, talking about politics, but never really thinking that I would run for office one day. I was a good Indian American kid, or a good Indian diaspora kid, went to medical school and became a doctor. But I was involved in Barack Obama's 2008 campaign, and saw the promise of that campaign of bringing the country together. Obviously, we're still working on healing some of the divisions in the country, but decided to put myself out there and run. Most people thought there's only been 2 Indian Americans prior to me who had been in Congress, and I would be the third. And it's like, well, that's not going to happen. But again, you put yourself out there. I ran on the values of our culture, and it's an American story of hard work, of just the pride of our heritage. And my district is not an Indian American district. Maybe just 3% of the population, maybe 10% Asian American. But again, on that story, was able to get elected, and now I'm serving my 5th term.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll come back to you, but I'd like to sort of, ask Lord Popat. Lord Popat, you are a former refugee from Uganda. You became a member of the House of Lords. What is it that led you to enter the field of public service?
Firstly, thank you for inviting me to this, this forum, and it's nice to be with some distinguished people like the Congress Amy Bera, who we just heard, and of course the Ambassador Badrising, Niermala Badrising. what made me go into politics? In fact, the history is that a large number of people in the late 19th century migrated from Gujarat mainly to Africa. And my grandparents migrated to Uganda. And that brutal dictator in 1972, exactly 50 years next year, kicked us out. So I came as an asylum seeker. A large number of that 45,000 were kicked out and 28,000 were given a very warm welcome by this country. And one of the things in Africa, and it still is true now, that we were economically very powerful, but we were not taking interest in politics in running that country. And that's why that was our failure. Hence, we were kicked out. Unlike in Mauritius, things were different. So I decided to go into politics to, for 2-3 reasons. Firstly, I believed in the conservative values of hard work, education, enterprise, family, faith. And secondly, it's important that the British Indians who came from Uganda and many parts of the world to engage in the civic duty of this country, including politics. So I started that process with Margaret Thatcher, then the Prime Minister. Now you can see a large number of British Indians in every field in UK. In the FTSE 100 company, we've got 4 cabinet ministers, or the 2 are for, one is from Uganda, the second most powerful job in the cabinet, Priti Patel, and the third most powerful, our Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, whose parents came from Kenya under very similar circumstances. So that made me go into politics and to encourage new young generation of British-born Indians, to encourage them to go into civic duty, to be judges, to be councillors, to be members of parliament. And of course, we now have 8 Ugandans in the House, in the parliament, 3 in the Commons and 5 in the, 3 in the Commons, yeah, and 5 in the House of Lords. So it shows that we have made very, very good progress. There are 4 British Indians now in the cabinet. I never thought it would ever happen in my lifetime, but I think it's a very good achievement. And I think credit goes to UK as a country, but also credit goes to the people who came forward to take part in politics.
Thank you a lot. Ambassador Badrising, you have had a long career, both academic and government, in the field of foreign affairs. What drew you to this field in the first place?
So, Aparna, when I was doing my law study, I became very much, I was very fascinated by the struggle for freedom, independence, and also at that time, everything that was happening in South Africa with relation to apartheid, and the developments within the context of the non-aligned movement, the struggles on my own continent in terms of countries trying to gain a larger voice at the international fora fascinated me a whole lot. As a law student, at some stage, there was an opportunity to being trained as a junior diplomat, and I applied to it. I became a trainee as a junior diplomat, and the circumstances were that around that time, we had a non-aligned movement bureau meeting in Suriname. Basically, that conference instilled my interest in studying international relations. After my law studies in Suriname, I decided to travel to the Netherlands and pursue studies in international relations. Now, the other thing that was also of relevance is that Indian Surinamese from Indian descent in diplomacy were almost of non-existent. And that was kind of a challenge for me as well. Now imagine I was at that time the 4th generation of Indian diaspora in Suriname. I'm sure that you have looked a little bit into the history of Suriname. The first immigrants from India in Suriname came in 1873. Actually, this year, we are going to celebrate 148 years of Indian immigration in Suriname. It was, as it has been explained by our founder, that the Indians came as well in Suriname to work on the various plantations. After their contracts had finished up approximately 1/3 of the contract laborers went back to India. The other part, the first group that came into Suriname was about 34,000 Indians. Now, in 1927, the Indian immigrants that chose to be in Suriname, they all achieved the Dutch nationality. So many of us had the opportunity to go and study in the Netherlands. While I was in the Netherlands, I pursued further studies in international relations, in international politics, and in international security. And after I returned, I joined the foreign ministry. Actually, I was in the foreign ministry only for a couple of years, basically, I think 7 or 8 years. And then thereafter, I was requested to serve in the president's office. And in the president's office, where I served as the chief coordinator for international affairs, I started to grow professionally, not only in the art of diplomacy, but also learning to balance diplomacy with politics, with development, and also with other matters that were related at that time to regional integration and achieving a place on the international arena as a small developing country. I'm very proud to say that at this moment of time, I'm still the longest serving female executive that survived many governments. I have served so far four presidents uninterruptedly, and I consider myself as a technocrat in Suriname, and I intend to continue serving my country in foreign relations, but also I'm trying to bring in young diplomats, also young Indian, well, I should say Surinamese from Indian descent into diplomacy. Very exciting field and very fascinating field of work, I should say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Chairman Bera, in your opening remarks, you had mentioned that you were the third Indian American, and there weren't, or sort of, at least at that time, there weren't that many people of Indian descent in your constituency. So when you actually ran for the first time, you know, what was your experience in trying to get the support of the Indian as well as other Asian Americans and even people who were sort of, you know, not Asian American or Indian? How much did the diaspora understand what you were trying to do, and how much did it support you?
You know, it was, you know, not having many people involved in politics. I think a lot of people scratched their head and looked on in wonderment. But, you know, the diaspora did come out to support financially, you know, certainly. And, you know, and that you've watched that develop over the past decade, you know, since I first ran. And, you know, I think part of it is if you look at the diaspora here in the United States, it's still fairly young. I mean, it's about one generation, and, you know, the majority of the diaspora immigrated in the late 60s, early 70s, but now we're the wealthiest diaspora in the United States, the most educated diaspora, and certainly one of the most accomplished diaspora. So, you know, I'm probably the first generation that was born and raised in the United States, but you're seeing this younger generation, you know, really get involved and seeing that they have a full seat at the table. And you're also seeing organizations like Indiaspora and other organizations starting to come together politically. And again, I think with Vice President Harris, you know, as a role model, you're going to see young Indian American women like my daughter, you know, seeing that the sky's the limit. So I think it's only a matter of time. There's now 4 of us in the United States Congress, so in a fairly short order, and you see many more people running, and you also see the diaspora, you know, understanding the importance of politics.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for you, which is that, so as you said, there are, you know, there's the vice presidents of Indian descent. There are 6 or 7 of you in the House and Senate, and there are many in the state legislatures as well, and a number of Indian Americans who are in public service. So for the young people who are watching this event today, who are still in college or about to enter college, and they are keen to follow you or follow Vice President Harris, what piece of advice would you give them?
You know, I would say get involved. I mean, and don't be afraid. You know, again, when I first ran, nobody thought I could get elected, but you know, you go out there, apply the same things you do in academics and business, work hard, put your head down. But I would also say run on the values that you were raised with, you know, values of family, of education, of hard work, of giving back to a community. Those are, you know, traditional Indian values that we were raised with, but they're also values that, you know, will work in any country, and, you know, that are aspirational values. And I always ran on my family's story. I never, you know, tried to underplay the story, because again, I think it's the story of the diaspora is a great story of success.
Thank you, Chairman. Lord Popat, as you mentioned, there are several people of Indian origin who are playing a role in politics, including the Conservative Party. What was your experience when you ran and you became the first Gujarati to represent the Conservative Party in House of Lords? What support did you receive from the diaspora? What were some of the challenges you faced?
I think generally it was, you know, I was very welcomed in the Lords itself. But obviously people, the Indian diaspora here were obviously quite excited to see a first Gujarati on the Conservative benches. Now, our Conservative Party historically was known as a very racist party. And the transformation of the party under David Cameron, so they were quite surprised to see that the Conservative Party is giving that warm welcome to somebody of Indian origin. And a lot has changed since then. Currently, we have 31 members of parliament, 15 in the Commons, about 16 in the House of Lords. And as I said earlier, there are 4 cabinet ministers, the most senior cabinet ministers, including Attorney General, who was a Goan lady, in our cabinet. So it shows a transformation, the reform that's taken place within the Conservative Party. I think there are many more to come, but also there are a large number of junior ministers, the Minister of State, who are of Indian origin as well. So, but very warm welcome by the people of this country, by the, I didn't receive a single hate letter from any English people, you know, or right-wing politicians. I think they realize that we have to be, as a country, they realize that we have to have people in parliament that truly represents this country.
Thank you, Lord. And I'll ask you a follow-up question like I asked Chairman Bera. To all the young people of Indian origin in the Indian diaspora in UK, what would you tell them, tell those who are interested in joining public service? What is some advice you would give them, and what are some of the things you would ask them to do, and maybe some of the things you know, they should not do when they are looking or seeking public service?
Well, one thing is certain about the United Kingdom, they've done so much for the immigrant community. The Indian community as a whole here have benefited. You know, there are amazing entrepreneurs, you know, a country that gives you opportunity. As long as you work hard, engage, integrate, integration is key. The diaspora community that have failed, people like Syrians and others, is because of lack of integration. And these are well integrated, born here, highly educated. In my days, and you know, when we first came here, most important thing was to have a roof over our head and have a job. Now these guys are all well-to-do, and there's nothing better. A better challenge for them is to enter into civic duty. And so this country has done so much. And the best thing this country has done to us, frankly, is given one of the best education to our children. And therefore go out, engage, do a civic duty out of love for the country. Remember that those very children say, wow, the circumstances under which our parents came here, many from India, from Kashmir, Kashmiri Brahmins, for example, who were given a warm welcome here. That this country has done so much for our parents, we want to do something in return for this country. Hence, they engage in civic duty, in voluntary organization, becoming judges, becoming school governors, some as councillors, and some as members of parliament. So they have a great future. Plus, I would say one thing, we are super bright people as well, and very adaptable. That's all this advantage. In fact, the congressman quite rightly say those values of adaptation, you know, we integrate quickly and we adapt to new ways of life.
Thank you, Lord. Ambassador Badrising, you have had a amazing career. I mean, you talked about how you were among the, I think, the first person of Indian Surinamese descent who was in the foreign service. You have spent a large part of your career as part of the government. My question to you is twofold. One, to all the young women who are watching you right now, anywhere in the Indian diaspora. So Indian diaspora has shown that women have played a role everywhere they have gone. But what would you recommend to the young girls watching you who would love to maybe follow you? Join diplomacy and rise to the top level, or join public service and become Minister of Foreign Affairs. What would you recommend to them? And the second is, to what extent did the Indian diaspora, Indian Surinamese, I believe, are the largest ethnic group in the country, if I'm not mistaken. So to what extent did did you get support from the Indo-Surinamese in your career? Thank you.
And let me start with the first one. I think that goes for whatever discipline of work you choose. Love what you do. Make sure that you are well equipped for that job. So as the other members of the panel indicated, make sure that you study, make sure that you strive to be the best in what you want to do. Learn from the experience of others. And I would say in international relations, you have to make sure that you are well informed about developments. Because in international relations and in international politics, things are evolving on an hourly, daily basis. So being well informed, being well read, and being able to make proper analysis will make you stand out. The other thing that I would definitely encourage young women to enter the field of diplomacy, international politics, and international relations is make sure that you are committed to the purpose of it. At the end of the day, if you join the foreign service of your country, you have to realize that what matters is to serve the national interests of the country in various areas. Because you have to deal with bilateral issues, but you also have to deal with multilateral issues. Multilateral issues, they are also evolving from a day-to-day basis, and it's always very challenging. Bilateral, it's easier. It's easier because you have to deal with countries and the areas of cooperation within countries. Again, as I said, study, work hard, excel in what you do, and stand out for being recognized as an expert in the field. Now, with regard to the other question, to what extent I got support from the Indian diaspora, I think I will have to explain a little bit about my own country. Now, Suriname has a population of 550,000. It is true that Surinamese from Indian descent, they constitute close to 28% of the population. But I would say that my country is the most diverse nation on the Western Hemisphere. We have various ethnic groups. We have descendants in Suriname from Indonesia, from Africa, from the Middle East. We have a large group of our population is also constituted of people from our neighboring countries. One of the features that really is very unique in Suriname is the level of peaceful coexistence. The social cohesion in my country, I would say, is exemplary. So I would not say that being in high positions would depend only on support of a diaspora. I think because of the smallness of the country as well, those who stand out are are being considered, and once you have the academic and the professional background of it, you quite often you are being recognized. I mean, in small societies like mine, people would stand out if they excel. I myself am not a member of any political party. And imagine we have over 30 political parties in Suriname. Every government is basically a coalition government, and not every appointee in government is a political appointee. There are also technocrats in it. I guess my acceptability in society is also because of the fact that through the years, I have proven to be a trustworthy professional. So I think that's my answer. I don't like to brag about myself, but I think that's the answer I would say, that my technocratic reputation has rendered support from various groups in society.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Chairman Bera, Lord Popat, and Ambassador Badrising. I will now be handing it back to Mr. Rangaswami and Sanjeev for the Q&A, and people are welcome to submit their questions using the Q&A feature. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Aparna and the panel. And we have several questions for you coming up from the audience. I'll let my colleague Sanjeev do the honors with the first one.
Sure, thanks, MR. Yes, we do have a few questions coming up from the audience, and as I wait for the audience to kind of populate their questions in the Q&A box, let me just start with one quick question of my own to any of the panelists that would like to address it. This may be of quite some interest to the people watching, and as well as others who will watch this event later via our social media channels and so forth. You've talked eloquently, all the panelists have, about the ascent of the Indian community in their countries in the political realm over time. Can you help educate us a little bit more about what are sort of the training grounds, if there are any schools or nonprofits or institutions, organizations that can help train young Indian diaspora in the political realm in your respective countries or regions that people can know about?
So I'll start. Obviously, seeing groups like Indiaspora, develop the AAPI Victory Fund and other organizations like that are actively either helping budding politicians learn how to run for office, but also how to fundraise and supporting those individuals. I think that's certainly helpful. I think all of us have an obligation to be readily available, when folks have questions. None of us see ourselves as role models, but all of us are role models in helping that next generation and guiding those individuals. So, I field phone calls from candidates that are running from city council all the way, up to other congressional candidates. So I think just being available and knowing that we're part of this diaspora and that, we have an obligation to help the next generation.
Great. Okay. In fact, it's a very, very good question. It's a very good question, basically. And I must admit, there is very little training given to develop a candidate, but we have a number of ways we do it. Firstly, quite often the workers, interns, I've got one working now with me, so eventually can develop as a good politician. But it's also important that they have, join public bodies, become school governor or something that develops him into, in civic duties. But we in the Conservative Party, for the first time, and I'm part of that committee of 5 people, we are now setting up a training academy for new generation, for new young people to come forward to develop them. Once we've selected the candidate, we'll continue developing and training them until they reach the House of Commons. So these are the areas. I mean, public speaking is key. At the same time, having a track record of civic duty is very important, We also advertise for public appointments, and quite often, if we think the candidate is going to be good as a member of parliament, we'll put him into one of the bodies to work, to get an experience, both in political field, but outside politics as well. But generally speaking, I mean, it's a very, very nice question, because there's not much training given to become member of parliament. You grow, you develop once you're in there. You're literally the deep end. And then you got to come out of it and become one. So this is why some of the Indian diaspora politicians have shined out, because they're so adaptable.
Madam Ambassador, if you have anything to add. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed, a very good question. And I think just like the other panel members of the panel have mentioned, I think one important part is that we continue to share our experiences with young people, but also mentoring students. Students in a specific field of discipline. I think it could be of relevance that we provide voluntary mentoring to them, and that would also enable them to to have that practical orientation as well as to what comes along in a specific discipline. One important element, I think, is also that students, if they have the opportunity, that they travel to various parts of the world where they can experience the various elements of culture, of history of countries, because broadening your horizon in different areas also makes you a better professional, a better human being, and a better participant in the international world.
Thank you. There's a question from the audience for Lord Popat, more geopolitical. You know, Africa has had some of these moves in the past to get Indians out of their countries and so forth. So what is going on there now? And it looks like maybe some of the countries are welcoming Indians back. Can you shed some light on the current situation, Lord Popat?
Yeah, well, I would say Africa is a young, new democracy. They're 50, 60 years old. They've gone through dictatorship, civil war, all that. But things are settling down, and Africa is a continent for the future. Post-COVID, I can tell you now, Africa is a place to be. There's no doubt about that. Africa is on the move, is going to play a much bigger role in the world as time goes by. And, you know, people, the perception people have of Africa is a continent that is begging for help. There's poor, military, dictatorship, tribalism, corruption. But I think things are getting better. You know, young democracy is getting better day by day. I mean, they're 60 years young. We are 800 years old, and we are going through a major constitutional crisis. You can imagine. So I think we must look at Africa from a very positive side. Africa is, frankly, I mean, I'm a trade envoy for DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. It's got the highest number of poor people. But DRC, if you do a search, is the richest country in the world, twice richer than the US. It's got 27 trillion worth of minerals. So we need to help them. We need to work with them and develop their country, you know, and invest in that country. So I think the perception of Africa is so negative by the West. And I think we need to change that perception. As far as the Indian diaspora is concerned, the Africans have realized they need them. They create wealth, they create jobs. They are the ones who pay the highest amount of tax. Uganda, for example, 70% of the economy now is in the hands of Indian diaspora people who pay 92% of the tax to the exchequer. So I think well, any businessman listening to this, I would say Africa is a future for trade and investment.
Thank you. Sanjeev?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we have a question that came in from one of the prominent members of our network here in the Washington, D.C. area, Smita Siddhanti, who serves on the global board of the Indus Entrepreneurs TIE, as you may know, and was the president of TIE in Washington, D.C. before. This is a question specifically for Chairman Bera. What change have you seen in the diaspora over time to support candidates of Indian origin? And how would you suggest we specifically increase that support moving forward?
Great. I think that's a great question. I'd look at the diaspora in two ways. One, there's the generation that, like my parents' generation, that immigrated here from India. And now there's this growing generation of kids like myself who were born and raised in the United States, who always have seen that they have a seat at the table and are looking at the world differently. So the immigrant generation sometimes get caught up in the politics of India and so forth. And the younger generation is really this socially active generation. And I would think about it in two ways. So I do think, you're seeing an evolution as more people get elected. And I think that'll accelerate with Vice President Harris. Historically, you looked at the diaspora from a potential fundraising perspective, but most of us were not running in districts where you had a large South Asian or even AAPI population. But that's changing as well. When you look at Congressman Ro Khanna, potentially with redistricting, he potentially will be in a majority Asian district. And you're seeing more of those districts start to develop. A candidate that ran in Houston, Shri Kulkarni, again, a large South Asian population. And increasingly, the population realizes, if they do voter turnout, if, they just boost things, we just had I'm a Democrat, so we had 2 successful races in Georgia where through a concerted effort targeting, the South Asian Indian American community, you were able to, it's not just about fundraising, it's also about getting people to cast their ballots and votes. And I think that sophistication is increasing. So it's not just the donations, but now it's the political engagement and organization. And you're seeing a lot more young Indian Americans get into political consulting, running campaigns as campaign managers, and so forth. And I think that is a good thing. And it's not just running as an Indian American, it's running as an American and on the values that we were raised with.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Bera. A question from Jay Challa, one of our Indiaspora members. How are you helping solidify and improve your country's relationship with India and help them develop? And I want Dr. Pande to first start answering this question a bit because of her new book as well. So maybe Aparna, you can get started and we'll get the rest of the panelists to chime in.
Didn't expect that. How sort of, I think it's more applicable to the others than me because I work primarily at a think tank. And so most of my work is sort of, focusing on the India-US relationship and special focus actually on the foreign policy and economic. And so from my point of view, I see myself as in some ways a bridge, somebody who can explain India to the United States and the world and try and explain, the India-US relationship and the US to Indians. Because very often we presume we know how the other system functions. And we presume we will be friends or we will be allies, but sometimes there needs to be somebody who explains the speak. And so that's how I see myself, as somebody who translates for the other side, pitches the importance of the relationship, sometimes shows potential pitfalls, but always keeps saying that it's a very important relationship at the strategic level, but at the people-to-people level. And there, I think organizations like Indiaspora are important because the Indian American community does play a big role in the United States, and the India-US relationship, is a relationship which needs to be nurtured at both ends. Thank you.
Thank you. And with the Biden administration, any predictions, anything as to how the relationship is going to go?
I think the relationship is going to continue to grow. If you listen to President Biden's own words when he was vice president, he said the US-India relationship could be the defining relationship in the 21st century. And, I would not have thought, where I would show my leadership in Congress would be in the foreign affairs realm. But when I was first elected, I was the only Indian American, and I had more coverage in India than I did here in the United States. So I understood the unique role that I could have in certainly furthering the relationship between the two countries. And one place where MR, we chatted last week about the synergies between the Jewish American community and the Indian American community. And I know we're going to actively work on, bringing those two communities together to both address issues here domestically, but also can we strengthen a trilateral relationship between the United States, Israel, and India, leading democracies in each part of our world, in a way that benefits each of our countries, but also benefits the world.
Thank you. And Lord Popat, I know you have a very active Indian population in the UK going back and forth to India. Your thoughts?
Correct. We have 1.7 million Indian diaspora living in UK. In fact, the Indian diaspora acts as a living bridge between our great country and India. Our Secretary of State for International Trade, my boss, was there last week with Piyush Goyal. In terms of post-COVID, what do we do about trade and investment? Our Prime Minister will be going this year to India. This is the 6th Prime Minister's visit in the last 8 years. Prime Minister Modi will be here for G7 meeting as well. So we have a very strong bond between the two countries, apart from, it's just not trade and investment, it's culture, it's sports, for example. We're doing very well in cricket, as you know. We can't wait to thrash India. I say this because we have, in fact, we have coined the phrase in this country, which I invented myself, proud to be British, proud to be, Indian or Hindu, whatever it is. So our nationality comes before anything else. And I'm glad the Congressman Barry mentioned about the Jewish community. In fact, in many ways, the Jewish community here in UK has helped us. We emulated their values, their way of life, their businesses, and we are so well integrated between the two communities and do so well. And this is why you can see the relationship between Israel and India is equally going so well, because there's so much commonality between the two communities. They both came as immigrants here. And look at the strong relation the Jewish community have with Israel, equally look at the strong relation British Indian diaspora have with India. So, our values, all this helps. And we, I think we will continue to do so. We're building these bridges, and we, as I said earlier, we have now British Indian diaspora in our cabinet.
Thank you.
Sorry, go ahead, MR.
We had another question, or?
Yeah, I think we have time for one last question before we close out the event. There was a specific question from one of the leaders of our network in Minnesota, a gentleman named Ram Gada, and this is specifically for Ambassador Badrising. Madam Ambassador, you addressed this during your remarks, but the question specifically pertains to how are women of Indian descent doing in Suriname in various different fields, whether it's politics, business, education, etc. And on our list, just as preface before you answer, as you know, Madam Ambassador, from our previous conversations before this event today, on our list, we have prominent women from Suriname, such as Minister Kuldeep Singh, Minister Mathura, and indeed Ambassador Kanhai, who is your ambassador to India. So in the political field, it's quite relevant, obviously, and quite evident. But if you can tell us a little more about how Indian women generally are doing in Suriname, that would be appreciated.
Well, thank you so much. And what an interesting question as well. In general, I should say that Indian women are doing very well. They are well educated, well represented in the different branches of government. In Parliament, we have 51 members in Parliament, and the vice Speaker of Parliament is Indian, and we have 13 other members from Indian descent. Of that, we have a considerable number of females. Within the government, we have 8 ministers, and I'm very happy to say that the Minister of Defense is a female, as well as the Minister of Labor, and Youth is also a female. But also in the judiciary, we have numerous female judges, and also from Indian descent as well. Women are prominently represented also in the business sector and banking sector, and within academia as well, as teachers, but also as university professors. So in general, I would say they are very prominent and very well, very visible as well in politics as well. In many political parties, they are very active members, but also representing in various boards of the political parties. So I would say it's a growing engagement. Society is changing as well. One of the things that I think will definitely influence the growing role of women in Suriname is the fact that both Guyana and Suriname are considered to become the next frontier in oil and gas. And that basically will change the entire geopolitical, geoeconomic dynamics of that entire region. That would implicate that educated women will gain more important places in different areas of society.
Great. Thank you. I think we're getting pretty close to our ending time. Maybe just take 10 seconds each, including you, Aparna, to just give some closing thoughts on what this means to be on the government leaders list and what this list means to the diaspora at large.
I'll start by saying that, it's actually an honor to be moderating the panel and to look at the list. And I've spent around, almost 17 years in this country, and remarkable transformation, at sort of, how deeply the Indian diaspora is engaged in almost every area. And I just wish it continues.
Thank you. Chairman Bera?
I think it means a lot that you're bringing the diaspora together from across the world, and just, in getting to meet the ambassador and Lord Popat. There's so much that we can work on together, in terms of strengthening, the Western relationship with India, and again, moving, the diaspora forward. So I think these meetings are always important.
Lord Popat?
Thank you. In fact, this was quite interesting. We should do more often. This is one way we can connect ourselves. But if you want me to conclude, Ramaswamy, you mentioned there are 32 million Indian diaspora living throughout the world. I would say we diaspora are beneath contempt, but in contribution beyond compare.
Thank you. Ambassador Singh?
Yes, well, I'm very proud to be on that list as well. Very proud that my country has been recognized, and that representatives from the Surinamese Indian diaspora are on it. I think it's an excellent initiative. I'm sure that gradually it will become more inclusive, but the most important contribution here is that it will create stronger bonds between the Indian diaspora everywhere in the world, and it will also help to create stronger bonds of Indian diaspora from all walks of life, and enhance collaboration in different areas. So a very laudable initiative, and I think all of us can contribute to make it a stronger entity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And Sanjeev, back to you for the closing.
Absolutely. I'll be brief in my closing. And as I do that, I'd like for the website to be pulled up again and shared on the screen. It's lists.indiaspora.org. And as you'll see, as we are scrolling down, there's not just a wide list of countries, but an impressive array of various headshots of people in various positions. And you can learn more about each of these people and the countries they represent on this website. Well, it's been a fantastic event, so inspirational. Each of you has such fantastic stories and shared such fantastic stories and insights through the course of this event. And we are extremely thankful to Dr. Pande, Lord Popat, Ambassador Badrising, and Chairman Bera for participating here today. Indeed, we are also very thankful to the audience and the participants on Zoom who gave us their time to be part of this event today and help make it what it is. And last but not least, as I close out, I'd really like to thank my colleagues here at Indiaspora, led by Mansi Patel, our communications director, and including other members of our team and indeed our interns as well, who have worked very hard over the past several months to gather this list and put it together, and indeed have conversations and email exchanges with so many of the people on this list. It's an honor for us at Indiaspora to compile this list and put this together. And like I was saying at the outset, it's really part of our mission to build bridges among the global diaspora and position the global diaspora as a force for good. And what better way, what better examples than all of the people that are on this list. So thank you so much for watching and attending. Thanks for your time. And with that, we'll close out the event.